Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we are looking at Render Network and its token, Render.
All right.
You might have heard of it.
Yeah.
Maybe not. But it's been called the Airbnb of GPU power.
I like that.
It's a cool little name, right?
Oh.
It basically connects people who need a lot of processing power with people who have extra.
Right.
Just sitting around,
Yeah.
not doing anything. And we are going to unpack this whole thing today, especially because Render has been all over the news lately
Oh, yeah.
with some pretty wild price swings.
Definitely some huge swings.
Yeah, so we've got a whole bunch of different sources for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Articles, social media posts, price charts.
Yeah.
We want to try to figure out what's making the price go up and down like crazy and what it means for the future of Render Network.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we find.
Yeah, definitely. So first things first, for anyone listening who might not know much about this, can you give us the quick rundown of how Render Network actually works, like what's happening behind the scenes?
Yeah. Sure. So basically, Render Network is all about decentralization.
Right.
So it's not controlled by one company or authority.
Right.
It's more like a giant network of computers all over the place working together
Okay.
to give people rendering power whenever they need it.
Got it.
So instead of like a big studio needing to buy and maintain their own expensive rendering farm, they can just tap into this network of individual users who are basically renting out their GPU power.
Well, that's smart.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they are just using their computer's extra power when they aren't using it.
exactly.
Cool. Okay, so how do they get access to that power?
So the way they tap into all that power is through the render token.
Right.
People who need rendering services pay for it with Render, and the people who are contributing their processing power to the network, they're called node operators.
Node operators.
Yeah, and they get rewarded in render tokens.
Oh, so it's like a give and take system.
Exactly. There's that built-in incentive for everyone. The more people need rendering power, the more the node operators get rewarded,
Makes sense.
which then brings even more people to the network.
Right, more people contributing their GPUs to the network.
Exactly.
So it kind of just keeps growing by itself.
That's the idea. Yeah, it's like a self-sustaining cycle.
Oh, and then there's that whole burn and mint equilibrium model too, right? I've heard about that.
Yes, that's right. And that's where things get a bit technical. But it's important because it directly affects the price of render.
Okay, break it down for me. How does this burning and minting work, and what does it mean for the token's value?
All right, so every time someone uses render tokens to pay for rendering services on the network, those tokens are actually burned.
Burned.
Yeah, they are taken out of circulation permanently.
Oh, wow.
At the same time, new render tokens are created or minted when node operators get rewarded for contributing their GPU power.
So it's like a constant balancing act between the tokens being created and destroyed.
Yeah, it's all about supply and demand.
Okay, so the more popular the network gets, the more tokens get burned.
Right.
And that should, in theory, make the remaining tokens more valuable because there are less of them.
Exactly. That's the basic idea of it.
Supply and demand, but with crypto.
Right, exactly. But there's actually a lot of debate about how well this model will work long term.
Really?
Yeah, some people are saying that there might not be enough tokens getting burned to offset the new tokens being created.
Oh, that makes sense. So there could be too many tokens?
Exactly, and that could lead to inflation and the value of render going down.
Oh, so this burn and mint thing is not a sure thing.
It's not a guaranteed success. It's a really complex issue.
Definitely something to pay attention to.
Sure.
Okay, well, let's talk about that big price drop everyone's been talking about.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
We got this post from Crypto Mechanic,
Okay.
and they are saying that 37% drop is a huge red flag, and things might get even worse if render drops below $4.11.
Yeah, I saw that post too. It definitely got people talking.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's clear that something is causing the market to react, and a price drop that big is definitely something to watch.
For sure.
But I think we need to look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
The whole crypto market has been up and down lately.
Yeah, it has.
So it's not really a surprise to see individual tokens like Render having some big swings too.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the daily changes and forget that crypto is really a long game.
Exactly. You got to zoom out and look at the long-term trends.
Yeah, for sure. But speaking of the long game, Render Network has been making some interesting moves, like switching from the Ethereum blockchain to the Solana blockchain.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
What's up with that? Can you tell us more about that change?
Sure. So the main reason for the move to Solana was to get faster speeds and lower transaction fees.
Okay.
Solana is known for being really fast and efficient.
Got it.
Which is perfect for a render network because they need to process a lot of transactions quickly and cheaply.
That makes sense. So for us normal users, what does this change actually mean?
So for most users, the switch should be pretty smooth.
Okay, good.
You'll probably notice transactions happening faster and lower fees when using the network.
Okay, cool. But is there anything deeper going on?
Yeah, actually, on a deeper level, the move to Solana shows that Render Network is aligning itself with other projects that are building something called Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
What is that?
DePIN for short.
DePIN, got it. Okay, so what are DePIN projects?
Basically, they are all about using blockchain technology to make decentralized versions of real-world infrastructure, like things like cloud storage, wireless networks, even energy grids.
Wow.
Yeah, the idea is to create systems that are more open, accessible, and resilient, and not controlled by just one entity.
That's pretty cool. So Render Network, by moving to Solana, is trying to be part of this bigger DePIN movement.
Yeah, exactly. They aren't just trying to change the rendering industry. They want to be part of a much bigger shift in technology.
Wow, that's a huge goal.
It is a really ambitious goal.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Definitely. I think they are onto something big.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we've got Render Network making this big move into the DePIN space.
Yeah.
But they aren't the only ones trying to get a piece of that decentralized pie, are they?
That's a great point. They definitely have some competition.
Yeah. So what does the playing field look like for them?
Well, there are a few other projects out there also working on decentralized rendering and cloud computing solutions.
Okay.
Some of them are focused on specific areas like gaming or scientific research,
Makes sense.
while others are trying to build more general purpose platforms like Render Network.
Got it. So
Yeah.
how does Render Network stack up against the competition? What are their strengths and weaknesses?
Well, one of their biggest advantages is that they were one of the first ones to do this.
Okay.
They've been around for a while now and have built up a large user base and network of those node operators.
Right.
They've also been really smart about integrating with popular rendering engines like Octane Render and Redshift.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah, so that makes it easier for artists and studios to start using their platform.
So they're trying to make it really easy to switch to decentralized rendering.
Right, exactly. They want to make the transition as smooth as possible.
That's a good plan. But what about challenges? You mentioned earlier that there's some debate about their tokenomics model working in the long run.
Yes, that's definitely something that some people have brought up.
What are they saying?
Well, the burn and mint equilibrium is a new idea, but it hasn't really been proven to work at a large scale yet.
Oh, okay.
It all depends on keeping a good balance between the amount of tokens being burned and the amount of new tokens being created.
Right.
If that balance gets messed up, it could lead to inflation and Render losing value.
So there's a chance the tokenomics could actually hurt the project in the long run.
It is a possibility, and it's definitely something that potential investors should think about.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's also important to note that the Render Network team knows about these concerns, and they are actively working on ways to make their model better.
Okay, good. So they are aware of it and trying to fix it.
Yeah, they seem to be pretty responsive to feedback.
That's good to know because they'll need to be flexible and adapt to the market if they want to be successful long term.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about tokenomics, but what about the technology itself?
Yeah.
Are there any limitations or challenges when building a decentralized rendering network?
There are definitely some technical hurdles to overcome.
Like what?
For example, making sure that the performance and reliability is consistent across a network of individual computers can be tough.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You're dealing with a lot of different hardware, internet speeds, and things that could go wrong.
So it's not just connecting a bunch of computers together and calling it a day.
Right, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Right, you have to manage all this decentralized infrastructure.
Exactly.
That's pretty complex.
And then there's also the issue of security.
Oh, yeah.
When you have a decentralized network, there are more places that someone could attack.
Oh, that makes sense.
So you need really strong security to keep people from messing with the network or stealing data.
Right, that's really important because if people are using this network for important rendering jobs, they need to know their data is safe.
Absolutely. It's a
Right.
big responsibility.
For sure. Okay, well, let's switch gears for a bit and talk about the potential of Render Network.
Okay.
We've talked about 3D rendering,
Yeah.
but what else could this technology be used for?
Oh, the possibilities are pretty much endless. We are talking about anything that needs a lot of processing power. Things like scientific research, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analysis, even virtual reality, and augmented reality.
Wow, so instead of universities and labs having to spend tons of money on supercomputers, they could just tap into this decentralized network of GPUs and get the same power for way less money.
Exactly. That's one of the big advantages.
And it's not just about saving money.
No, it's also about making these powerful tools available to everyone.
Oh, right. So it's like democratizing access.
Exactly. Imagine a world where any scientist, researcher, or developer, no matter where they are or how much money they have, can get the computing power they need.
That'd be amazing. It could really change a lot of industries.
Yeah, it could really level the playing field.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But let's get back to reality for a second. What are some real examples of how render network is being used right now outside of 3D rendering?
Well, we're already seeing some cool use cases in science.
Oh, like what?
For example, there are researchers using Render Network to run complicated simulations for things like developing new drugs, climate modeling, and even astrophysics.
Wow. So they're basically using the power of the crowd to tackle huge scientific problems.
Exactly. It's like crowdsourcing for science.
That's so cool. But what about everyday people?
Yeah.
How does Render Network affect someone who isn't a scientist or a 3D artist?
That's a good question for the average person. The impact of Render Network might not be obvious right away.
Yeah.
But think about all the things that rely on heavy computing power behind the scenes. Things like streaming services, social media platforms, online gaming, even self-driving cars.
Oh, wow. So Render Network could be making all those things faster, cheaper, and more efficient.
Exactly. And as we need more and more computing power, the need for solutions like Render Network is only going to get bigger.
Makes sense. So we've talked about the competition, the challenges, and the potential, but let's get down to business.
Okay.
For someone listening to this who's thinking, hey, this Render Network thing sounds pretty cool, maybe I should invest. What are some questions they should be asking themselves before jumping in?
That's a great question. First of all, they need to do their own research.
Yeah.
Don't just rely on what you hear on this podcast or read on social media.
Do your homework?
Exactly. Dig deep into the project, read their white paper, understand the technology, and get a sense of who's behind it all.
So do your due diligence. Don't just jump in without knowing the risks. What about the financial side of things? What should people be looking at when they're trying to decide if they should invest in a crypto project like Render Network?
Well, the price of the token is obviously important, but it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
You also need to look at things like market capitalization, trading volume, how healthy the overall ecosystem is, and how much development is happening on the project.
So it's not just about buying low and selling high.
No, it's about understanding the fundamentals of the project and making a smart decision based on your own goals and how much risk you're comfortable with.
Absolutely. And don't forget, the crypto market is super volatile. Prices can go up and down like crazy.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster.
So you got to have a long-term outlook and not freak out when things change quickly.
Exactly. Don't panic sell just because the price drops, and don't go all in just because it's going up.
Right. Stay calm and think long-term.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about all the important stuff.
Yeah.
But now I'm curious, what's your personal take on Render Network? What are you most excited about?
You know what excites me the most?
Right.
It's the potential of this technology to give everyone access to computing power.
Yeah.
And unleash a wave of new ideas across so many different industries. We're talking about everything from life-saving medical research to cutting-edge AI to creating immersive virtual worlds.
Wow, it's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. Render Network is putting the tools to build the future in the hands of anyone with an internet connection.
That's a powerful statement.
It's a game changer for sure.
I love it. So for our listeners who are still on the fence, wondering if Render Network is worth their time, what would you say to them?
I would say this. Do your own research, explore the possibilities, and ask yourself if you want to be part of building a future that is more decentralized and gives more power to the people.
I like that.
The potential is there. The technology is moving fast and the future is being shaped right now.
Yeah.
Don't just sit back and watch, get involved and be part of the conversation.
That's a perfect way to put it. This has been a really fascinating deep dive into the world of Render Network. We've only just scratched the surface, but I hope this has given you a taste of what's possible with decentralized computing and made you want to learn more.
Me too.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
Absolutely.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2025-0316, part 2 of 3.
Okay, cool. So we've got Render Network making this big move into the depend space. But they aren't the only ones trying to get a piece of that decentralized pie, are they?
That's a great point. You know, they're not operating in a vacuum. There are a handful of other projects out there exploring these decentralized rendering and cloud computing solutions too.
So, like, what else is out there?
Well, some are focusing on specific niches, like gaming or scientific research,
Okay.
while others are trying to build those more general purpose platforms like Render Network.
Got it. So how does Render stack up against all the competition? What are their strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I'd say one of Render Network's biggest strengths is that they were kind of the first ones to really do this. They've been around for a while
Right.
and have built up a pretty significant user base and a good network of those node operators.
Right.
They've also been strategic about integrating with popular rendering engines, like Octane Render and Redshift.
Oh, yeah, those are big names.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes it easier for artists and studios to adopt their platform, to kind of jump on board.
So they're trying to make the transition to decentralized rendering as smooth as possible for people who are already using those tools.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're meeting people where they're at.
Smart. Okay, so what about the challenges then? You mentioned earlier that there's some debate about the long-term, sustainability of their tokenomics model.
Yeah, the burn-in and equilibrium is a novel approach, but it's still unproven at scale,
What do you mean by unproven at scale?
Like, it works in theory, but we haven't really seen it play out with a huge number of users and transactions yet.
Okay, so it's like a wait and see kind of thing.
Exactly. And it all hinges on maintaining that delicate balance between the rate of token burning and the rate of new token minting,
Yeah.
If that balance gets thrown off, it could lead to inflation and a devaluation of render.
So there's a possibility that the tokenomics could end up hurting the project in the long run.
It's a possibility for sure. It's something that potential investors should definitely factor in.
Okay, so it's not a guaranteed win.
No, not at all. But it's also worth noting that the Render Network team seems to be aware of these concerns, and they're actively working on ways to refine and improve their model.
Okay, that's good to hear. They're not just ignoring the potential problems.
Right. They seem to be pretty responsive to the community's feedback, which is a good sign.
Definitely, they need to be adaptable if they want to succeed in the long run.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about tokenomics, but what about the technology itself? Are there any inherent limitations or challenges to building a decentralized rendering network?
Yeah, that's a good question. Are there any fundamental roadblocks they might run into?
Well, there are definitely some technical hurdles to overcome.
Okay.
For example, ensuring consistent performance and reliability across a distributed network of individual computers.
Right, because you're relying on all these different people's computers.
Exactly. You're dealing with a wide range of hardware specs, internet speeds, and potential points of failure.
So it's not as simple as just plugging a bunch of computers together and calling it a day.
No, not at all. There's a lot of complexity involved in managing and coordinating this decentralized infrastructure.
That sounds pretty tricky.
It is. And then there's the issue of security,
Oh, right, because with more computers comes more potential vulnerability.
Exactly. When you're dealing with a distributed network, you have a larger attack surface, more places where someone could try to get in.
Right, so they have to be extra careful about security.
Absolutely. It's crucial to have really robust security protocols in place to prevent malicious actors from compromising the network or stealing data.
Because if people are relying on this network for important rendering jobs, they need to be confident that their data is safe.
Exactly. It's a big responsibility for Render Network to keep everything secure.
For sure. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the potential of Render Network. We talked about the 3D rendering use case, but are there other applications for this technology? Where else could this go?
Oh, the possibilities are pretty mind-blowing. We're talking about anything that requires significant processing power, like scientific research, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analysis, even things like virtual reality and augmented reality.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty much any field that needs serious computing power.
So instead of universities and research labs having to invest millions of dollars in their own supercomputers,
Yeah?
they could potentially tap into this decentralized network of GPUs and get access to the same level of computing power at a fraction of the cost.
Exactly. That's one of the huge benefits of this kind of decentralized approach.
That's amazing. And it's not just about cost savings either.
Right.
It's also about giving more people access to these powerful tools.
Absolutely. It's about democratizing access to these resources. Imagine a world where any scientist, researcher, or developer, regardless of their location or financial resources, can access the computing power they need to make groundbreaking discoveries.
That would be incredible. It could really level the playing field in so many industries.
Yeah, it's really exciting to think about the potential impact.
It is okay, but let's bring it back down to earth for a second. What are some concrete examples of how Render Network is being used today beyond the 3D rendering world? Like, are there any real-world applications already happening?
Yeah, we're already seeing some interesting use cases emerging in the scientific community, for example. There are researchers using Render Network to run complex simulations for drug discovery, climate modeling, and even astrophysics.
Wow, so they're essentially crowdsourcing the processing power needed to tackle some of the biggest scientific challenges facing humanity?
Exactly. It's like a global brain working together to solve these complex problems.
That's really cool. But what about everyday users? How does Render Network impact someone who's not a scientist or a 3D artist? Like, how does this affect the average person?
That's a great question. For the average person, the impact of Render Network might not be immediately obvious.
Because they're not directly using the platform.
Exactly. But think about all the technologies that rely on heavy-duty computing power behind the scenes. Things like streaming services, social media platforms, online gaming, even self-driving cars.
Oh, yeah. Those all require a ton of processing power.
Exactly. So Render Network could potentially play a role in making all of those things faster, cheaper, and more efficient.
Okay, so even if we don't see it directly, Render Network could still be making our lives better.
Yeah, exactly. And as the demand for computing power continues to grow exponentially, the need for decentralized solutions like Render Network will only become more apparent.
All right, so we've talked about the competition, the challenges, the potential, but let's get down to brass tacks here. For someone who's listening to this and thinking, hey, this Render Network thing sounds pretty interesting. Maybe I should invest the piece. What are some key questions they should be asking themselves before taking the plunge?
That's a crucial question. First and foremost, they need to do their own thorough research.
Right. Don't just take our word for it.
Exactly. Don't just rely on what you hear on this podcast or read on social media. Dig deep into the project, read the white paper, understand the technology, and get a sense of the team behind it.
So due diligence is key. Don't just jump into something without understanding the risks involved.
Absolutely. And then from a financial perspective, they need to consider things like the price of the token, of course.
Right. Everyone wants to know about the price.
But it's just one piece of the puzzle. You also need to look at things like market capitalization, trading volume, the overall health of the ecosystem, and the development activity on the project. Is the team actively building and improving the platform?
So it's not just about buying low and selling high. It's about understanding the underlying fundamentals of the project and making an informed decision based on your own investment goals and risk tolerance.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that the crypto market is incredibly volatile,
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Prices can swing wildly in both directions, so it's crucial to have a long-term perspective and not get too caught up in the short-term fluctuations.
Right. Don't panic sell just because the price dips, and don't go all in just because it's pumping.
Exactly. Stay calm and think long-term. #TTS, the deep dive episode 2025-03-16, part 3 of 3.
It's been fascinating unpacking all of this. And one thing that really stands out to me about Render Network is that it's not just about the technology. It's about a whole philosophy, too.
Right. It's like a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah, we're talking about shifting power from those big centralized institutions to a network of individuals.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big shift.
And that has some pretty profound implications.
It really does. Render Network and that whole Depend movement are challenging the foundations of how we think about infrastructure and access to resources. Like traditionally, computing power has been in the hands of a few big corporations and governments, but Render Network is flipping that model on its head and putting that power back in the hands of the people.
And that's a really appealing idea, especially nowadays when there's so much distrust of those big institutions. People are looking for alternatives, and Render Network seems to be offering a glimpse of what that future could look like.
Exactly. It's about creating a more equitable and democratic system where anyone, no matter where they come from or how much money they have, can access the resources they need to innovate and create. It's about empowering people and communities to build the future they want to see.
That's inspiring stuff. But let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Are there any potential downsides to this decentralized model? Is it all sunshine and rainbows, or are there some legitimate concerns we should be thinking about?
Well, as with any new technology, there are always challenges to overcome. One concern that comes up a lot is efficiency. Centralized systems are often optimized for speed and performance, but decentralized networks can sometimes be slower and more difficult to manage.
So there's a trade-off between decentralization and efficiency.
Potentially, but it's important to remember that decentralized systems are still pretty new. As the technology gets better, we can expect to see big improvements in efficiency and scalability.
That makes sense. What about other concerns? Are there any security risks that come with using a decentralized network like Render Network?
Security is always a concern no matter what kind of system you're using, but with a decentralized network, you have a larger attack surface, as we talked about before, meaning there are more potential entry points for hackers.
So the security of the network depends on everyone being careful as node operators.
To some extent, yes, but the Render Network team is also implementing strong security protocols at the platform level to reduce these risks, and actually the decentralized nature of the network offers some inherent security advantages as well.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, in a centralized system, if the main server goes down, the whole network goes down with it. But with a decentralized network like Render Network, there's no single point of failure. If one node operator goes offline, the rest of the network can keep running without any interruption.
So it's more resilient to attacks or outages. That's a good point. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the technology, the tokenomics, the competitive landscape, the potential benefits and risks, and even the philosophical implications of Render Network. But as we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your personal take on this project. What excites you the most about Render Network?
You know what excites me the most? It's the sheer potential of this technology to democratize access to computing power and unleash a wave of innovation across so many industries. We're talking about everything from life-saving medical research to cutting-edge artificial intelligence to creating immersive virtual worlds. Render Network is giving the tools to build the future to anyone with an internet connection. It's truly groundbreaking.
Well said. And for our listeners who are still on the fence wondering if Render Network is something they should be paying attention to, what would you say to them?
I would say this. Do your own research, explore the possibilities, and ask yourself if you want to be a part of building a more decentralized and democratized future. The potential is there. The technology is evolving rapidly, and the future is being written right now. Don't just stand on the sidelines. Jump in and be a part of the conversation.
That's a perfect note to end on. This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the world of Render Network. We've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully this has given you a taste of what's possible with decentralized computing and inspired you to learn more, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep with us. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for having me.